Thank you, Matt. Do you have any details on the U.S.-Iraq security cooperation dialogue that's being held in Washington today, as the U.S. ambassador to Iraq has said?
Yeah, so representatives from the State Department, including Deputy Assistant Secretary Victoria Taylor and Ambassador Romanowski, are participating in the U.S.-Iraq Joint Security Cooperation Dialogue this week with our colleagues at the Defense Department. This is the second joint security cooperation dialogue between the United States and Iraq. The meetings are an opportunity to reaffirm our joint commitment to security cooperation and regional stability and continue discussions on further developing Iraq's security and defense capabilities.
Will they discuss the U.S. Forces' presence in Iraq?
So I don't want to get into it in detail. We'll have a statement that comes out after the meeting, but we do remain committed to the higher military commission process that began in August. I think, as you know, that process is to determine how the coalition's military mission will transition based on the threat from ISIS, operational and environmental requirements, the capabilities of Iraqi security forces, but I don't have any further detail to give on.
And finally, when will the meetings be done?
I would defer to the Defense Department. They are the actual hosts of the meeting. They are this week in Washington, but with respect to specific timing, I would defer to them to speak to it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Two questions. Former President Trump said last week that he got along well with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and he said it is good to get along well with a country that has many nuclear weapons. As you know, North Korea has continued to develop nuclear weapons and WMD, even while engaging along with the United States and North Korea, or South and North Korea in the past. How would you comment on about getting along with the dictator Kim Jong-un?
I wouldn't.
Why not?
I typically prefer not to comment on campaign matters from this podium.
And also, North Korea is already threatening the Korean Peninsula with nuclear weapons, as well as the international community. North Korea is also demanding a price to give up its nuclear weapons. Do you think that if we get along well with North Korea will give up its nuclear weapons?
So I'm not going to speak to comments that were made in the course of the campaign, which I know that's a question asking me to respond to. But I will repeat, as I've said before, we have made clear on a number of occasions that we prefer diplomacy to deal with this situation, and the North Koreans have shown that they are not in any way interested in that.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on the senior leadership meeting this morning? Was there any talk of a shift of priorities, or is there any hope or less hope for accomplishing some certain goals for this administration now that there's a 6-month condensed timeline for its existence?
No talk of shifting priorities. In fact, just the opposite. As I said, the Secretary telling the team that he wants all of them to continue to focus on the priorities that we have been working on. Obviously, if you look across the world, it will be continuing to deepen our our partnerships in the Indo-Pacific regions, part of what the Secretary is doing on this trip that he will undertake at the end of this week into next week, but there's other work that happens at the levels below him. It's continuing to hold Russia accountable for its aggression against Ukraine, and it's working to achieve a ceasefire and ultimately lasting stability and security in the Middle East. But those obviously aren't the only things. You look across every bureau of this department, they have things that they're working on, and the Secretary's mission is keep focused, keep at it, and work as hard as possible to run through the tape. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Massive killings going on in Bangladesh, as you know. Bangladesh security forces given shot on sight, and nobody knows the death toll. Internet shutdowns for 50 days today, and its death toll crosses hundreds, and government is using their Supreme Court, Supreme Court, to control the voices of the students. So it's just, an unthinkable situation. And I saw the many members of the Congress, human rights organization, asking to and expressing their solidarity with the student movement. Nobel laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus urged the world leaders, including US and United Nations, to act promptly to rescue the Bangladeshi people and the democratic rights. So what is your comment on this?
So we are closely following developments in Bangladesh. We continue to call for calm and de-escalation. We condemn all recent acts of violence in Bangladesh and reiterate our unwavering support for peaceful assembly. In addition, we remain deeply concerned by reports of ongoing telecommunications disruptions across the country, which limit the ability of people in Bangladesh, including American citizens, to access critical information. We call on the government to restore internet service. We condemn the reported shoot-on-sight orders that have been given and call for those to be rescinded. And of course, I would just, as a final thought with respect to the situation, reiterate that media freedom is an essential building block of a thriving democracy. It is essential that journalists in Bangladesh, as is true everywhere in the world, be able to function freely.
One thing is around
no interruptions, just
around,
one at a time.
You know, the Bangladeshi people are protesting everywhere in the world, you know, in front of the State Department, White House, Times Square. But the UAE, when they are protesting in the Dubai, some places in UAE, they sentenced 57 Bangladeshi for 11 years. Why they are protesting against their own government. So what is your comment? And finally, do you rely on Bangladesh regime as you are calling and urging they will entertain your call and urge, you know? As we see in last 15 years, Bangladesh is run by an authoritarian regime and they are trying to keep their power by any means using the security forces.
So with respect to the first question, I wasn't aware of that report, so I'm reluctant to comment on it, as always the case when I don't have perfect information here. But when it comes to the government in Bangladesh, it's a government with which we've worked on a number of issues, but we also make clear when we have concerns, as I believe I just did.
One follow-up.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Same, I know that you will tell already that you told, but the widespread violent protest happened in Bangladesh recent days, and already Bangladesh Supreme Court on Sunday rolled back most of the controversial quotas on government jobs. That is, they now send back to the government that this quota system they should change, and they are taking this time. Maybe they're giving the ruling from government would be 93% of government job will be free for the without quota. But my question, already my colleague asked about that. I want your comment on that. I will write it. In light of recent sentencing of 3 Bangladeshi to life imprisonment in United Arab Emirates, just they were protesting in what happening in Bangladesh. How does the State Department view the development in terms of human rights and diplomatic relation between the United Arab Emirates, Bangladesh, and the United States? Additionally, what step, if any, in the United State Department considering to address the broader issue of the treatment of foreign workers in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia?
Well, let me just say, so I said 60 seconds ago, I wasn't aware of that specific report. I obviously didn't sneak out of the room and read about it between the time he asked his question, you asked yours. So I'm still unaware of that specific report, so can't comment on it in any detail.
One follow-up back.
No, just let, and did you have another one?
Yeah, just if you have a comment on the ruling of Bangladesh Supreme Court that
no, because with respect to the underlying quota system and whether it goes forward, whether it's rescinded, that's an internal matter for Bangladesh to decide. Where we feel the need to speak out is on acts of violence, on the shutdown of the internet, and other things that impact fundamental human rights, human dignity, human freedoms.
Thank you so much.
Matt, thank you. The current situation in Bangladesh, is the military is taking over the power now? What do you have comment on that? I think military is taking over.
I just don't have an assessment on that. Go ahead.
Matt, how are you? My name is Jacob Milton. I'm representing.
I'm good. Thanks for asking. No one ever does that.
Thank you.
Most of your colleagues don't care about my underlying feelings up here. They're quite indifferent to them. In fact,
we all do.
I would not. Of course, the feeling is not mutual. I care about all of your
we all
underlying
Matt,
status.
So far, about 1,000 people are being slaughtered, and another 1,000, 2,000 people become the victim of enforced disappearance by the government forces in Bangladesh. Also, there is a eyewitness news and my reporter in the border. There is infiltration of Indian forces and Humvees military vehicle inside Bangladesh, aiding Bangladesh police, RAV, and BGB in enforcing killing and enforced disappearance, extrajudicial killing and enforced disappearance. Other than general awareness, other than general concern of America, does America has any plan to take the side of Bangladeshi people to protect them, protect their right?
So, as I just said, we condemn all acts of violence, and we condemn acts of violence no matter who they are perpetrated by or perpetrated against. And so, of course, we stand with the Bangladeshi people. We support freedom of assembly. We support peaceful protests. But when it comes to acts of violence, whether they be committed by people conducting protests or by government authorities, we condemn them in all instances.
Okay, Matt, last thing I would like to discuss. Secretary Blinken, he is visiting South Asia. He is concerned, he is very much showing solidarity with the people of South Asia, and that is really very good thing for the Asian people. Now, to protect America's national interest in Bangladesh, people views if there is a caretaker government under the leadership of Dr. Mohammed Yunus with the strong ties with US government and European Union, Bangladeshi people may have their right back to cast their vote, and they would like to see the peaceful society in the country. I know America is aware and concerned, but awareness and concern did not stop. Thousands of people are getting killed, thousands are getting disappearing from their house. Is there anything else that people can expect from America?
So we will continue to make our concerns clear, and we will continue to speak with our partners in the international community about concerns that we have. But when it comes to, it's not so much the premises of your question, but as somewhat a point that you raised, as opposed to alternative leadership in Bangladesh, that ultimately is a question for the Bangladeshi people, not the United States of America. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Going back to the ceasefire deal, actually, Secretary's remarks, the 10-yard line was on Friday, just before Sunday, President Biden's decision to drop out the race. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu arrives in a very politically uncertain environment.
I was to say, I feel dots being connected here that don't necessarily connect, but go ahead. Maybe I should, go ahead.
No, I would just, I'd just like to ask, should we still expect that ceasefire deal put forward by President Biden stand as effective as it would be, given he's not running for the second term now? Because there are reports that Prime Minister Netanyahu might be dragging his feet until November to see who would be the next president of the United States.
So absolutely, and I think you have to remember that when the president outlined that proposal publicly, it was a proposal that had been put forward by the government of Israel. It was Israel's proposal. We had obviously been involved in the development of that proposal as our role in one of the mediators to the negotiations, but it was ultimately an Israeli proposal. Now, as I said in response to, I don't remember whose question it was earlier, we continued to be involved in those negotiations and trying to move them forward to get them across the line. And what we have seen is, on behalf of the Israeli government, is them engaging, also trying to get a final deal. Now, there are things that they have put forward that ultimately are difficult, just as there are things that Hamas has put forward that are difficult to resolve. But we believe that ultimately those all ought to be resolvable. Again, always with the caveat, that doesn't mean they will be resolved. Negotiations are tough, and I think as the Secretary said on Friday, that sometimes the last 10 yards can be the hardest length to cover. But we have made important progress, and we continue to push to try and get it over the line.
Yeah.
So
let me finish talking.
Might be the hardest to cover, but it doesn't take 3 days. I mean, that's a pretty crappy red zone offense.
So if you
3-4 days now.
So if you look at how long we have been involved in these negotiations,
Yeah, I
this
get
is
it,
not
but
a
he said it on
the
Friday.
analogy does not carry over to a 60-minute football game. We have been involved in these negotiations for some time, going back months. If you
Like an
going back-
8-month, a 9-month.
Going back
football
months is
game.
obviously.
Sounds more like a cricket test match than it does.
Here you go with cricket again. You're now testing my cricket knowledge again.
Well, let's talk water polo then.
Definitely not.
you don't have any concerns that the process would be slower now, given the president is not running for a second term because of the uncertainty for a second term of...
I do not. Look, ultimately, we believe a ceasefire deal is in the interest of the government of Israel. It's in the interest of the Palestinian people. That's why it ought to be agreed to, and we'll continue to push for it as hard as we can.
Thank
now,
you.
Hiba, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
the meeting between the Prime Minister and the President doesn't take place tomorrow or before that Secretary travel to Asia, do we expect a separate meeting between Secretary Blinken and Netanyahu?
I just don't. It's hard for me to answer that without knowing when the meeting with the Prime Minister is going to be scheduled. So before I get into what I would expect if something doesn't happen, I think I'll wait and see what actually does.
Thank you.
Ask me on Wednesday if it hasn't happened yet, then maybe. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. How are you doing, by the way?
Thank you.
You've been very kind today, and I am very emotional guy. So if you're going to be this down, the next 3-4 months are going to be very tough for me. So please cheer up. It's still a few months to go.
I didn't know I was giving out such a
So
down
Pakistani
appearance.
embassy in Germany was attacked by these Afghan kids, and they ripped off the flag as well. Your reaction on that, and then connecting it with the last week question a little bit. Pakistani journalists are condemning that Voice of America had given so much coverage to that day when the funeral was held, and kids were walking with Afghan flag in Pakistan. But to this incident where in Germany, Pakistani embassy was attacked, flag torn down, and tried to burn it. Your reaction on both of these things?
So with respect to the underlying incident, let me take it back and get you an answer. With respect to Voice of America's coverage, Voice of America is an independent outlet that makes its own editorial decisions. Any concerns that people have, they should direct to them.
But it must affect diplomatic relations, though, right?
They make independent editorial decisions, and you should direct any questions to them.
Okay. Just one question more, please. And because this question, me and you have talked about it so much, not as much as Imran Khan. President Trump in his speech had mentioned two things which I have been raising with you multiple times, and in Pentagon as well. 14 U.S. soldiers who died at the last day. And I asked for inquiry at the Pentagon. My issue was that the U.S. was already withdrawing. There was no ambassador of State Department at that time in Afghanistan. The second thing I've been raising with you and Mr. Kirby is the weapons left there. Mr. Trump mentioned it as well. Now, the other thing is Reuters mentioned, again, this issue I've mentioned with you, that the U.S. funds to Afghanistan may have landed into the wrong hands as well. All these three issues, I want to give you again an opportunity to at least give your opinion or thoughts about it in a more...
If you want a different answer, you're not going to get one. With respect to the to weapons, I would defer to my colleagues at the Pentagon, obviously, who I think you've raised that question before. They're the appropriate agency to speak to that. When it comes to U.S. funding of the Taliban, no, we flatly do not fund the Taliban. Made that clear on a number of occasions. Go ahead.
Follow up on Netanyahu. Has there been any engagement or discussion with Israelis regarding Netanyahu's expected remarks to Congress on Wednesday?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure it may have come up anecdotally. Obviously, we talk to the Israeli government all the time, but no, I'm not aware of what he's going to say. So, Alex, go ahead, and then Jenny, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Mike. On South Caucasus, we have Russian officials over the weekend stating on the record that Russia is, quote, prepared to assist the ruling Georgian Dream Party in maintaining power if required. Any concern about Russian attempts to meddle into Georgia's upcoming?
Look, so we have seen a number of Russian, not just attempts, but we've seen outright Russian interference in elections all throughout the region and all throughout the world, and we are always vigilant in watching those. And as you have heard us say on a number of occasions, it is important that the Georgian people and the Georgian people alone decide the future of their country.
Thank you. And on Armenia, I want to get your thoughts about today's EU decision to start both a visa-free dialogue and also supporting with funding from European Peace Fund, its implications for our region, please.
So Armenia and Azerbaijan continue to make significant progress toward finalizing a peace agreement. We are committed to supporting that process. As you have heard us say, the time for peace is now, and we continue to work to try to reach an agreement.
And the specific decision about EU's...
I don't have anything specific to that.
Fired on by Israeli forces in Gaza. Has the Israeli government given you any information about this incident? Are you... We
have inquired with them about this strike. I do not have any information about it as of yet. If it's made it back to us, it hasn't made it to us.
I mean, this is happening as you guys have touted this new deconfliction mechanism, how do you make it that it's safe for humanitarian convoys to move forward if even this isn't working?
So look, it is always going to be, anytime you're in a conflict zone, it is always going to be difficult to proceed with humanitarian work. And what we try to do is to make it as safe as possible, recognizing that this is still work that's happening in a conflict zone, which is why you hear us speak on a number of occasions to the enormous sacrifice and the enormous risk that humanitarian workers put themselves under. And so we have kind of two tracks on this. One is trying to work with the United Nations to try to make it as safe as possible. The Secretary spoke to Sigrid Kaag, the UN coordinator for Middle East humanitarian issues, earlier today about a number of humanitarian issues, including this. But we also continue to work to try to get a ceasefire. The other significant line of work that the Secretary spoke to Sigrid Kaag about today was how we get all the mechanisms in place so if we do reach a ceasefire, humanitarian aid can surge into Gaza as quickly as possible. And obviously, in the context of a ceasefire, it will be much safer for them to move about Gaza and do the work that they need to do without worrying so much about their personal safety.
Is there any discussion of punitive measures for Israel if they continue to knowingly fire on marked humanitarian convoys?
I don't have anything to read out at this time. We'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you.